Hello and welcome to another jam-packed episode of My Favorite Conservative. I am Edward.
And I am Andrea, but I am not conservative.
Really?
No, but he is my favorite conservative. So true. We're not live today because I'm traveling again 2 weekends in a row, but we do have a very, very special show for you. I am so excited to introduce our guest. We are speaking today with Katherine Makinney. She is the founder of the website and organization AmericanPOWs.com, and we will definitely have a link in the show notes. Katherine, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So let's start with, was anyone close to you involved in January 6th? Is that what initially attracted you to this?
I know several people that went that are scared to this day that the FBI is going to be banging on their door at 6 a.m. And that's very wrong to participate in a peaceful, and it was pretty peaceful until certain things happened, which we can get into in a minute. But it was the intent was all peaceful. Nobody brought any weapons. I mean, if it was a quote unquote insurrection, wouldn't you bring a weapon? That'd be the first thing.
You would think.
All of history that someone starts an insurrection with no weapons.
So before we hit record, we talked a little bit about your background. So I think it's really intriguing. So what was it in your background that prompted you to do this?
Well, it just so happened that I started studying comparative economics in high school, actually.
Wow.
And took an extracurricular course from an organization called the American Free Enterprise Institute. And it was about what would a perfect system be? And from there, I went to Stanford. I did study engineering, but I went overseas and was able to study comparative economics because I was in Vienna from a Marxist professor, and we took field trips to Soviet satellite countries.
Wow.
To show the contrast, and he was advocating for Marxism, and I said it doesn't appear to be working very well. And he said, "Oh, that's because the whole world has to be Marxist for it to really work."
Wow.
Right, the right people aren't in charge, right?
Yeah,
that's the typical. Yeah, so if we ran it, it would be really good, right?
Yeah. Well, in a way, the WEF, the Great Reset, that is the attempt to make the whole world kind of a quasi-communist Marxist dictatorship, really.
Yeah.
Agreed, yeah.
Is your organization only limited to January 6th?
I did not use the term January 6th or J6 anywhere because I felt like, as I mentioned earlier, that this is part of a color revolution, a part of a slow moving. This particular last 4 years, it's been moving very quickly. Right. But in general, it has been a slow move towards a Marxist takeover. And so I know from history that the J6ers are simply the tip of the iceberg. That should Harris get in, it won't stop with J6ers. It won't. Yeah.
Yeah. When I heard saw your website name as American POWs, I've always referred to this in my head as the American Gulag, especially like where they're being held.
Yes.
And it just seems very Soviet-like.
Oh, it is. It is. Very much so.
We'll dive deeper into that. Let's start with January 6th, and then I want to talk about the other things you're involved in. Again, before we hit record, we talked about this word insurrection. What comes up for you when you hear the word insurrection?
Well, now it's been sullied. It has become a caricature of what it really is. An insurrection is when there's an attempt to take over a government. Those individuals protesting what they felt was a stolen election, and I also believe there was a massive amount of fraud. Right. And all the smart people I know, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, believe Trump will win, they will cheat, so it's just a question of who takes the seat, how much cheating. I think cheating's now become pretty accepted, that's what is going on. And I think there's a lot of evidence, and there's a lot of different ways they're doing it. But in any case, people were very upset about it, as they should be, because it is a complete destruction of a democracy. Is when you squire the elections, you no longer have a democracy, and you no longer have a republic. You no
Right.
longer have a country by, for, and about the people. So it was heartbreaking to patriots. I mean, people that 72% of J6ers were either former law enforcement or veterans. So
Oh,
these are
that's
yeah,
what we wanted to know. Wow.
yeah, these are people that have, mostly men, that have stood up for the country. They're sheepdogs. They're protectors. They felt motivated to express deep concern about that election. They should not have been, I think, entrapped. I think it was an entrap, not that much different than the Gretchen Whitmer incident, where they indicted 12 and 8 of them were FBI agents.
That's a perfect segue to the Capitol Police.
Mm-hmm.
And what was going on there. Edward, would you talk about the time-lapse footage a little bit? Ask for thoughts.
I've seen a little bit of, I think it was probably drone footage, from above in time lapse. And the thing that kind of jumped out to me, and maybe you can elucidate, it looked like the crowd was, relatively well behaved at the time. And then you started seeing the tear gas canisters and the rubber bullets coming from the Capitol Police side, and then all hell broke loose. Is that something that you've seen?
Yeah, there is a documentary called J6, A True Timeline, and it's all video, moment by moment video. So what it shows is what happened was, and Nancy Pelosi has admitted to this at this point.
Yes, she has.
No, they knew that there were going to be upwards of 1 million people there, and generally, you have a ratio that's safe between police and protesters, and the protesters, they were just going to be like, 20 to 1, and that's not good. That's not best practices at all. But I believe that was the intent, that to understaff the Capitol Police. So they were overwhelmed, and they just put up bicycle racks around,
right,
and there weren't signs. There is a DC law that says that they're supposed to warn people coming up that they have to back up. DC law, and they violated it. And because I think they were scared, they just started throwing tear gas and rubber bullets into the crowd, and a melee started, and there were protesters that were falling, that were impacted by the tear gas, and then other protesters that were trying to help them, and the police were pushing, and it became a chaotic melee. And anyone that was pushing back on the police to try to help a fallen protester is now serving 7 to 8 years for assault on the police.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I believe one of Trump's biggest mistakes he made after January 6th, up to basically the debate the other night, was not informing people 100% that Nancy Pelosi and Muriel Bowser were in charge of security or calling out a National Guard at the Capitol. And he should have been pounding that from day one, and he really hasn't.
Yeah, well, he has said that. He has said it. He doesn't pound
that needs to be number one, though. When you're talking and they start blaming you for your speech, I think, he said peaceful and patriotically. He said that a few times, but it wasn't his position, and he offered troops. Am I correct? He offered troops.
And during the event, they said, "Oh, he sat there and did nothing." He actually said, "We've got to call in the National Guard."
Yeah,
and that is documented. Someone that was in the room, who was somehow a law enforcement. I forget what his role was, but he testified, yes, Trump tried to get extra support. And then Stephen Sund, who was the Capitol Police chief at the time, said he called and said, we need more people. And he waited 71 minutes.
And didn't they immediately dismiss him like the next day? Am I correct on that?
Yeah, I think so. They blamed it on him when he was doing everything he could. He was doing everything he could to get backup, and they were not giving it. They wanted that to happen.
They did. What do you think about FBI plants?
Oh, That's what I was just going to say. So there was a FOIA request on the FBI to find out how many FBI agents, because if you've watched any of the congressional testimony, they won't say, "Oh, we can't comment on ongoing investigations."
Right.
They'll be saying that in 60 years, right?
Right.
So
They're still saying that about Kennedy. So.
yeah, exactly. So there was a FOIA request, and the response was, "There's so many we don't know." Clay Higgins, a Louisiana congressman, did his own investigation and has stated on Tucker Carlson that there were at least 200 FBI agents dressed as Trump supporters in the Capitol, because if you know anything about the Capitol, it's constructed kind of like a maze. Like if you just went in there and said, I want to find a particular Nancy Pelosi's office, it might take half a day. So they were there to say, come on, let's go to Nancy Pelosi, let's go to Mike Pence's office. So they were there to guide them. Again, that is entrapment.
Yeah. It's interesting that you brought up Mike Pence. What do you think of his response to it?
Well, I've heard rumors, because he had said his position was, yeah, I'll ask for a pause. And having a pause to debate the certification is not unique. It happened in 1870, 1872, something like that, where they actually, there was some question about the outcome of particular states, and they discussed it, and they actually compromised. They actually came up with a solution in Congress. That's by the way, that is democracy. That's like,
right.
Let's discuss this. Doing what they did, which was, I think the intent was to have some kind of emergency. So it was just let's certify. That was the goal. Mike Pence had said he was going to pause and have a discussion. And the rumor I heard was that someone said, we'll back you for president if you just go ahead and certify. And Mike Pence wanted to be president. I talked to someone that worked for him for many years, and I said, what really happened? And he said, yeah, it happens to a lot of politicians. He wanted to be president. So, and he ran, and I think he got 1% or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I don't know who's going to back him, because but if you watch the certification right afterwards, Mike Pence and Nancy Pelosi did a fist bump.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that's the old, every politician looks in a mirror and sees the president of the United States staring back at him. Right?
Yeah, he's my favorite. He's so funny. Oh my gosh. Let's talk about the charges that these people are facing, because there's just so many. Can you talk about just some of the charges that they're facing, or that they've actually been convicted of, and give us some more detail and background?
So in reality, the best charge, the worst charge you can come up with is that they trespassed. Okay. Even though the doors were open and many of them thought that they were invited in, they really did think that. But nevertheless, that's a misdemeanor. Okay. But
no, Katherine, is trespassing the same as parading? Do you know?
No, parading is separate. So what they do, what the DOJ, what a Marxist court would do, is try to maximize the sentence. Okay, so you trespass, but we're going to make this into kind of what they did to Trump in New York. We're going to make this into a felony. It's going to be 25 years, kind of a Soviet kangaroo court kind of thing. And so what the DOJ did was stack charges. And that means things like trespassing, parading, disorderly conduct. They stack it. But it helps a lot if they can get a felony in there. So that's why they were grabbing 1512 C2, which the Supreme Court struck down. But they were grabbing it from an Enron statute that was placed into law because it was making it a felony if you're under investigation by the SEC for a financial crime, that you cannot destroy documents. It was a document shredding statute, but it had the text obstructing an official proceeding. Essentially, what you're doing when you destroy evidence is obstructing official proceeding. So they just took those words to felony, and then they could upgrade other misdemeanors to felonies, and that's how some of them got 7, 8, and Enrico Terrio got 22 years.
Wow.
Oh my God.
Now, I've heard a lot recently with a lot of these political persecutions that the process is the punishment.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it is, but here in J6, you're actually talking about real jail time.
Oh, yeah.
And,
Oh, yeah. Well, a couple of them have committed suicide. It's been
yeah.
so overwhelming because they'll initially present the stack charges, the upgraded misdemeanors to felonies. And by the way, even though the Supreme Court struck that down as usage, it's still incumbent on, rather than do the right thing. The right thing would be, okay, Andrea Jones, your sentence was 7 years, but we used that felony. It should be more like 4 years. We're correcting that. Instead of doing that, it's incumbent upon the J6ers to file to have these charges reevaluated. And the DOJ said, go ahead. We're going to figure out a way to get you the same amount of time.
And that takes money, right, to hire attorneys.
Yep.
That takes that takes the wherewithal to know you need to do that, and then it takes money to get attorneys and real fortitude to hang in there. And then, like you said, in the end, it may not matter anyway. And I don't know. It's just so shocking to me.
When you look at the process too, it's not a jury of your peers. DC is 98% Democrat. Most of the juries are government workers. Many of them recycle through. They have already decided that the J6ers are guilty. The judges have decided that. It is not a fair trial. Many J6ers can opt for a bench trial, which means the judge decides. And the judge, one of them, I forget who was telling me this, he decided he was eating a sandwich during lunch, gave him like the standard 4 to 5 years or whatever. It's all very cut and dried persecution, really. It's not justice in any way, shape, or form. And one solution that has been, I think would be great, is if you're charged with something in DC, that you can be tried in your own jurisdiction. Because if this is tried in Alabama or in Oklahoma, these would be like, oh, yeah, you trespassed. Okay, 6 months probation, maybe.
Yeah.
Right. That kind of leads into what I've always been thought about this. After it happened, the moral preening of both the left and the right, where they always want to pretend they're taking the high road, and they say, well, if they committed a crime, if they did something, they should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Well, trespassing can be a slap on the wrist, or you can get 3 years or something, right? Every case should have been taken into consideration. When you've got a 70-year-old grandmother that just walked in and maybe said a prayer, and you're charging her with something that has a wide range of sentencing, and they're opting to go for the absolute maximum on it. That's insane.
Well, here's what's interesting. It was just, I think now 3, maybe 4 weeks ago, the Hamas protesters broke into the Capitol. They actually vandalized, they spray painted some words. They were pushing around police officers. I think 72 of them got arrested. Do you know what happened to them?
I'm going to guess.
Gets released.
Charges dismissed? Yeah.
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 So when you have, I always say, I did one, it was a conservative podcaster, but he really believed the J6ers deserved everything they got. So it was a little bit of a debate. But my position was, when you have unequal scales of justice,
right.
If you're white or black or a woman or a man, or you're a Trump supporter or a Biden supporter, if they're unequal, that's not justice. There's no justice in it. When justice isn't blind, it's not justice.
Well, I know it was Attorney General Merrick Garland that said this, that justice is blind and administered equally. And Edward had some examples he wanted to ask you about. So,
well, I mean, obviously you've got Steve Bannon and Roger Stone and Peter Navarro and Paul Manafort, right? Here are these elderly gentlemen, and I think what Peter Navarro was taken off a plane in handcuffs, right?
Yes.
And I believe the rest, there were pre-dawn raids by dozens of FBI agents and dogs and you name it, right? That it used to be, up until very recently, that our justice system was unequal, usually between the rich and the poor, right?
Yeah.
And especially minorities, that sort of thing. And now it has become way more political, right? Am I right on that?
Absolutely. It was Obama that started the weaponization of all the agencies. If you're a conservative, you're probably going to get audited by the IRS. If I'm sure Steve Bannon has, Tucker Carlson has. In other words, they use the agencies that are supposed to administer something, particularly the law enforcement agencies, as a cudgel to punish people that do not think right.
Yeah, Lois Lerner in the IRS.
Yes.
Started back then with Obama, right? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So they've now it's now just exploding. I mean, look what they did to poor Donald Trump in Mar-a-Lago and rifling through Melania's underwear drawer. I don't know if you know what that really was about. Do you know what that really was about?
I know you do. I know a little bit.
She broke up on me a hair there. So
go ahead. Say it again, Katherine.
Well, do you know what the raid on Mar-a-Lago was actually about? It was not about documents.
They said it was about documents.
Well, yeah, that was the cover. To me, it was more sending a message.
Well, actually, what it was about was that there was a binder called on Crossfire Hurricane. In other words, the FBI knows that they broke their own laws in pursuing Donald Trump from before he became president and continued spying on him and lying to the FISA court. And they know that was against the law. And there was a binder of all the details of that Trump he had it. He had that information and took it with him. So that raid was about getting that binder back. But the pretext of it was, oh, you took some classified documents. By the way, every single president.
Right. We've talked about this.
Yeah, because they want to write a book, right?
Right. So, they all do. They all take classified documents.
Yeah, and so they had a little kerfuffle with Clinton, because the Sox case, he had recordings that he wanted to keep, and so, but they always resolve it peacefully without any raids. They don't do that, and this was in a totally different level because they're covering, and the cover up is much worse. It's, in my opinion, I think it's going to extend into this next election.
Oh, I think so too. What are your thoughts about the BLM riots? Because I know at the time, and we won't go down the rabbit hole of COVID, but Edward and I were talking about how, isn't it interesting that, we're not supposed to go outside unless we have a mask on, which, we're not shy about saying we live in Birmingham, Alabama, and we kind of live in a blue dot in our city, and it's very interesting in a very otherwise red.
We've got a lot of Harris yard signs out here.
Oh, we do, yes, because we live near the university, but it was just like people would look at us if we were walking our dog outside without a mask. But then the BLM riots happened. And while there weren't real riots here in the city, there were some issues. So for our attorney, for example, his building was broken into in downtown, and that happened to a bunch of different buildings in downtown Birmingham. But again, not true riots to the level you saw in other cities. But what are your thoughts on that? Because there was so much hypocrisy around it.
Well, I think they showed their true colors when they said you don't have to wear a mask and you can get up close like this in a protest, a BLM protest, and it's fine. It's not a public health issue at all, unless you happen to be a conservative. Then it's a huge public issue. So I just think they showed their colors, and I think I'll speak for myself. Initially, I was thinking, okay, this is serious, but after about 2 weeks, I started realizing the inconsistencies. I started seeing it. It only took me about 2 weeks, and I thought, like you have to wear gloves, and that viruses live on dry surfaces for days. That's actually not usually true. Right. So there was just a lot of really, truly misinformation that they were putting out as official, and I thought, I don't know what this is, but it's not what it appears to be. So
I think if there were a Democratic dictionary and you tried to find the word hypocrisy in it, you couldn't find it. It's non-existent.
No,
to them.
I hate to say I agree with that. But I do, and I always feel like I'm a registered independent, and even when I was living in California, when I was finally able to vote, I registered independent. And as you know, California used to have closed primary elections. That's the only reason I ever registered as a Democrat in California, because I wanted to vote in the primaries. But once I moved back here to Birmingham, I was like, nope, I'm an independent through and through. I don't vote down ticket. I don't, I just, and then the Democratic Party, I think it was Reagan who said, I didn't leave them, they left me. That's exactly how I feel. I just feel like, what the heck happened? And actually, would you bring up, you were listening to Bill Clinton speak the other day, an old speech he did, and you were saying what you thought people would think of it today.
Yeah, it was one of Clinton's State of the Union speeches. I forget which one. And he was talking about illegal immigration, actually calling it that, and how we need fences and walls, and how they're taking jobs from, Americans that Americans will do. It was every bullet point that we have on the right. And Bill Clinton was, pounding his chest about it. It's just stunning. I need to find the clip, and we need to put it up.
Yes, yeah. So he was just saying, if you played that and you didn't recognize Bill Clinton's voice, you would just assume it was a conservative. But that just shows you how far the party's gone. Yeah. I mean,
well, because it's not really the Democratic Party. It's not the Democratic Party of the United States anymore. They have moved so far to the left. They're basically a Marxist party. They're basically everything that Democrats used to stand for. I mean, RFK speaks to this so eloquently, but free speech, they're against free speech, right? They're all into censorship. Right. No wars. They're totally into wars. There's just not enough wars ever. And medical freedom, they're not into that. They want mandates. So everything that Democrats used to stand for, they don't stand for anymore. So it's too bad. Too bad people don't see that. Yeah.
Yeah, when RFKJ, goes over to Trump and endorses Trump after. I mean, he's a Kennedy, and that should, to me, that should tell people something. It really, really should. It doesn't. Did you want to ask her about this last one you have here?
Yeah. I know this is what we talked mostly about J6, but what about what we've seen on the sentencing for abortion protesters with the FACE Act?
Oh yeah, it's the same category, really. It's political dissidents, right? They are not. They're not. They are actually standing up and disagreeing with the regime, and they will be taken care of. And the FACE Act is also being abused to put people in prison for long periods of time, because, abortion is a pillar of the left, because it's kind of a pillar of, I don't know where you are spiritually, but of godlessness, right? Because when you can separate sex from the intent of procreation and bonding between a man and a woman, when it's just whatever, whatever, when it's that, it almost becomes a god. It becomes a god that, and a woman should be able to have as many abortions, because she should be able to have sex with as many people, whatever time, whenever, she wants. And during an abortion, they call the fetus a product of conception. The products of conception will be destroyed. And that's their goal, is that, and they want to pay for it. They want abortion clinics. And you know that Planned Parenthood started by Margaret Sanger, who was a eugenicist, right?
Yes.
So it was actually started to depopulate the Black race, and now it's being used to depopulate Americans.
Women.
Yeah, well, men and women.
Yeah. So I just wanted to make a little joke when you were talking about that in between sexual relations. I was going to tease you and say, don't make fun of my college years now. Okay. No judgment. Not that I've ever had an abortion. Yeah. And Edward and I feel very, very differently about this. I mean, I do feel like it should be legal, but again, I'm kind of like Clinton, safe, legal, and rare. And I don't think that it should be,
celebrated.
Not celebrated, nor should it be even in the third trimester, unless the mother's health is at risk.
And I think we should probably point out for our listeners that the FACE Act is that basically when you are impeding somebody from walking into, or at least standing in front of an abortion clinic where they cannot get access to it. Is that what they're trying to say?
I don't know the particulars of it, honestly, but I know that some people were just praying in front of a clinic.
Yeah. But they consider that
they weren't stopping. They were praying, and they do talk to people because they want to pray for them.
Right.
And that is not acceptable.
Yeah, where I just saw the other day an 89-year-old woman got sentenced to 10 years in prison for the FACE Act. It's insane. It really is insane.
No, it's evil. It's so wrong.
Katherine, I wanted to ask you if there were any of the people who participate in January 6th that you're trying to help with your organization. Again, AmericanPOWs.com. We're going to put this in the show notes. Because when I went on the website, I felt very drawn to this one person. I didn't know why. And his name is Christian Manley. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's a former Marine. He was raised in Alabama. It was like my intuition kind of knew, and my spidey sense. And what I thought was so interesting about him was that he participated in January 6th. So again, that's January 6th, 2020, people. Then he's now out of the military. And he decides that he's going to become a commercial fisherman. So he is in Alaska.
Yeah.
And a year and a half later, like August of 2021, and the FBI tracked him down by that October. So more than a little bit more than a year and a half later, he was arrested at the airport. I don't know if that was coming back to visit his family. But what shocked me about him was that he got, I just want to double check this. He was in prison for 2.5 years. He was sentenced to another 50 months. And to me, this just shows you that the sentencing doesn't fit the crime, because the restitution is $2,000. And the special assessment fee, which I feel like is probably cash in somebody's pocket, is $100. And to me, usually the sentence and any fines, they go together, right?
They match up a little closer.
They match up a little closer. And $2,000 in restitution does sound like, maybe public trespassing to me.
Right.
It's crazy. And so is there any story, because you've heard so many, that really resonates with you or stands out, or that you'd like to share with our audience?
Well, I wrote or edited. I hired a team of writers, and they're not all up yet, but I have written about half, or I should say edited about half. And I will tell you that going through the stories, because we had to do research, because the information in the mainstream media is all negative, like they're horrible, evil people. But the truth is they had lives. Most of them were, blue collar workers, hard workers, married with kids, kind of similar stories. But they would be so devastating. I mean, just some of the stories, I would cry. So one guy, he was an orphan in Ukraine, and but he was deaf, so no one wanted to adopt him. And a lesbian couple in DC, for some reason, decided they wanted him. And so he came over like in '95, and his name is one of their names. It's a joint, and the Gostinowski. It's a very long. It's Vitaly Gostinowski, and he was troubled because he was 5 years old and had been in an orphanage. Who knows? Probably
what happened.
What happened? But he probably didn't get a lot of holding or love, so he was troubled, and he didn't do well in school, and his mothers were both very concerned. And they actually sent him to an institution when he was 15 because they were having so much trouble with him. And something happened in the institution where he decided he was going to make something of his life. So he went to Arizona to a community college where he decided he was going to major in criminal justice and do something with his life. And he graduated with an associate's degree and got accepted into a DC university for the deaf. And he was doing really well. He was one credit away from his criminal justice degree. And he attended January 6th, and he was disowned by his mothers. He was disowned by, because of what the DOJ, they arrested him. I think he's got 4 or 5 years. He was disowned by his deaf community. He was kicked out of school. Oh, yeah. And there's story after story. Like one guy had, again, kind of a troubled childhood, met a woman, got married very happily. I don't remember his name, but I remember the story because it's, again, so heartbreaking. They were adopting a child. They were starting a life together. He was getting his life back together, went to January 6th. They convicted him, destroyed his marriage. He could no longer adopt the baby, and now he's in prison alone. You just hear this over and over again. And it's, the goal is destruction. They're destroying these people's lives. And a lot of them, they just went into the Capitol.
Yeah. And it is the people's house. I mean, I've been there. I've been to the Senate. I've been to the House. I've advocated for bills. So it is supposed to be the people's house. I want to ask you, so we're recording this now in mid-September, and in a few states, early voting, which is a whole other topic, has already started. But this is going to air in mid-October. So this is going to air approximately 3 weeks before the election.
Close. Yeah.
Yes. And I don't think we have any early voting in Alabama, do we?
No.
Yeah. And what do you want to say to people out there? And let's put them in my group, like the people who are independent, who don't vote down the ticket, who do pay attention to ideas, but may still be undecided. And I'm not saying I am, but I will tell you that I personally have not voted for a major candidate in an election in 20 years. And that's how unhappy I've been. So I've written in candidates. 1 year I did vote for the Libertarian. I completely threw my hands up in the air, and in 2016 and in 2020, I was just so beyond frustrated. But now I feel like between our show, between watching what's happened with our country, even though I know which way Alabama's going to go, it's not going to be a swing state. I feel like I need to vote. So what do you say to that small majority of people that, if they can stop the cheating somehow, what do you say to people like me, who may not like Trump, let's say, his personality, right? Who maybe would have actually voted for Ron DeSantis? What do you want to say to them?
I want to say that you're not really voting for a person, you're voting for a set of policies. And most people feel like they were better off under Trump than they were Biden. And that Biden and Harris are a continuum of opening our borders, which is destroying many cities and counties. We know this. Yeah. And it's only going to get worse. It's not going to get better. She's not going to do anything at the border. She's not going to build a wall because it's part of the agenda. And by the way, they use our tax money. The thing that has caused inflation is massive spending bills. They stuck if you can imagine flying people in from all different parts of the world, you have caravans with, really nice buses and really nice hotels waiting for them. Some of them get up to $5,000 a month. They get hotels that they can stay in. They get food. They get flown wherever they want to go. All that costs a tremendous amount of money. You're paying for it. That's not going to change. That's going to increase, most likely. And because the goal is not so much that they will vote, but the key thing that they want now is they just want those registrations so that in the middle of the night when they need 100,000 extra votes, they can get them. They can grab them, So and then we'll probably have what California has, which is one party rule. Now, you want to look at one party rule. The crime is horrible. As a single woman, I'm not safe. I'm not safe in California. Many places. Some places I'm safe, but many places in downtown LA or downtown San Francisco, so you have unmitigating crime. You have incredible inflation because they're going to continue with putting all this stuff in the spending bills and spending, because Cloward Piven, who put together a plan to basically turn the U.S. into more of a communist state, that Obama and Hillary both, he was teaching Cloward Piven. So they both are very aware, but Cloward Piven, they said one way to weaken a strong state like the United States is massive amounts of debt. So they're going to continue spending, and they're going to continue spending in ways that do not help you. There was $8 billion designated for charging stations. They've built 3 with that $8 billion.
Yeah, you talked about this.
They don't care. They don't really care because the goal is the debt. So if you want to live in a free and prosperous nation, hold your nose, vote for Trump. It's because this is just the beginning of the plan to completely turn the U.S. into something that is unrecognizable to most Americans.
Yeah. If I can jump in here, I actually saw a post on X today, and it was by, I think his nickname is Tig Teagan, and he was a contractor at Benghazi when it was attacked. And he was one of the co-authors of 13 Hours, the movie, and everything else.
Oh, yeah.
And it caught my eye because he writes in the first paragraph sentence, "I am not voting for Donald Trump." And that's an attention getter. He said, "I am voting for," and he went down at a complete list of what he's voting for. And at the end, again, "I am not voting for Donald Trump. I'm voting for a free America." And I think
that's a great way to put it.
Therefore, he's going to put a mark on the Trump.
Yes, correct. Yeah. He's not voting for Trump. He's voting for somebody who's going to make America strong again.
Yeah. Which, by the way, is not going to be easy. It's going to be very hard.
Oh, Lord. Yeah. This, when people say, "Oh, it doesn't really matter who the president is," and I think that's where we go back to the whole gist of this thing with January 6th was people realized, especially on the right, what was at stake by having the election stolen, if you will, or not fair. And that's what got inflamed passion just going so hard. What would happen if Joe Biden took over? And we've seen, and it's been an absolute disaster.
Yeah.
Around the world.
It's hard for everybody, unless, I guess, if you're in the 1%, you don't notice 40%, 50% inflation. Yeah. And the open borders don't affect you because you fly private, you have gated communities. You're never impacted by the policies that many of these people support. But most people, we're deeply impacted by these things. And it lowers our standard of living.
Oh, God.
Yeah, and the quality, for sure.
Yeah. Our lives aren't the same. Yeah.
I have to tell you, from one former Californian to another, my friends thought I was crazy when I left California because I lived there my whole adult life. I moved there right as soon as I turned 18. I moved there. And I actually didn't envision living anywhere else, but I just wanted to get out of Los Angeles. But I'm from the Southeast. I grew up all over the Southeast. And when my friends heard that I was moving back to the South, they all thought I was absolutely bananas. I'm sure they said the words midlife crisis behind my back. And now they all, even my most, who I'm talking about, my most far-leaning left friend, even she now is looking at houses in North Carolina because that's where all her family is. And they all think now I was some kind of crazy prophet. And then I had a really good friend, to be fair, she is conservative, but she and her husband moved to Alabama a year ago now. And it's really funny because he, born and raised in California, had spent some time in Arizona, but had never actually spent any time really east of Arizona. And he said the funniest thing was they came out here first to kind of look at Tennessee, where you are, Georgia, Alabama. They weren't quite sure. And I met them during their travels. And he said, I have to tell you something. He's very introverted. He doesn't talk a lot. And I was like, what's that? I've known him for years. And he said, I like to drive. And I said, oh, you mean when you're not in traffic and it's actually normal? And he said, yes, you know. And
Yeah.
and their entire lifestyle has changed. Like
Yeah.
their standard of living, their quality of life is just totally changed. And they're just so much happier. And people thought I was crazy. And
Yeah.
I can't imagine
I don't know
what your
about
friends
you. I don't know about you, but when I go back, I just went about 2 weeks ago. I came back. I'd spent a week in LA. The differences, they're so they're just like
Yes.
it's how do I say, it's so packed. Everything's so packed in LA, and then it's dirty, and it's kind of an assault. There's so much noise and dirt and grime, and it's overwhelming. And then you come back here and it's kind of serene and green and rolling hills, and it's just you're like, wow. I thought it would be. I thought, okay, it's not going to. There's not going to be as much culture, and there's just as much culture, and it's better, I think. Yeah.
I think so too. And I agree with you. I go back every year. But I never usually spend more than like 4 or 5 days, because that's my max, because I'm done. Done. And one year I was visiting, and I while I was in traffic, I actually, this is how like not moving we were. On my private Facebook, I posted 3 miles in 90 minutes. And it was like, hashtag why I left LA.
Yeah.
It was like, anyway, I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. But Katherine, thank you so much for joining us today. If people want to reach out to you, your organization, again, we'll put it in the show notes, but where should they go?
Yeah, go to www.americanpows.com, and you can get a bracelet there. You can get a POW bracelet, and I'm wearing Jake Lang, and you get a story. So, because as you know, you can read the stories on the website, but the stories are kind of heart-wrenching, almost all of them. And and then it tells you how you can help them. If you, how to write to them, how, when their birthday is, if they have a Give, Send, Go page, that kind of thing. And because I just feel like as Americans, we should support. The more people that know and the more people that are involved, the less likely it's going to continue. That's how I think about it, because Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, if we'd only known, when they were cracking down and starting to arrest people, he said, we complied. We completely complied. But if we'd stood up, and they knew every once in a while someone might not go home, one of these SS officers might not end up home, it would have stopped. So I just feel like Americans need to know what's going on. We need to stand up. Now is not the time to be silent. It's the time, because if it continues, it's going to get harder and harder to stand up.
Wow. Thank you so much for joining us today. Edward, anything else?
No, that's wonderful. Yeah. And I love, if you don't have any particular person with your wristbands or bracelets, is there one that just says American POW or something like that?
No, all the bracelets have someone's name.
They do. Okay.
Gotcha. Yeah. Awesome. And some of them reach out to me that I haven't told the story of. I haven't manufactured a bracelet for, and I will. They can just pay wholesale, and I'll send them a bunch of bracelets, because I think they want a momentum from this time. But anyway, I'm trying to help them any way I can, and many of them are becoming, interestingly enough, kind of becoming activists. Actually, they're so mad about what has happened to their lives. But
for good reason.
Yeah. Well, Katherine, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.